Welcome to our panel on fighting fat phobia. My name is Dr. Caroline Heldman, and I'm the Executive Director of the Representation Project. The Representation Project is an intersectional gender justice organization, and we are dedicated to uncovering the ways in which gender oppression intersects with race, with age, with class, with ability, with sexuality, and body size. And just for clarification, yes, we are using the term fat. It is not an insult. We are a growing number of individuals and organizations who are using fat and reclaiming that term. And I'm joined today by Skye Reed, our social media manager, and Rebecca Cooper, our research director, and of course, our illustrious panel. Just a few words. First, the Representation Project is tackling fat phobia head on. Sizeism, fat phobia, and fat hatred have been normalized in US society, and they have profoundly negative effects on people of size. Let's be clear about this. Fat phobia is a social justice issue. And at the Representation Project, we envision a world where all bodies can live free of hatred and discrimination, regardless of size. And we want to work toward that world, and we hope you will join us in this effort if you're not already working on this. The Representation Project has worked for over a decade to make the representation of gender and other intersections better in media, more inclusive, and we see fat phobia as the next frontier in the fight for better media representations. This is a wake-up call for content creators that they can no longer erase fat people or portray them in disparaging ways, such as the punchline to a joke. And to this end, we have a path-breaking research report, the first of its kind, that I will be dropping in the chat as soon as I pass the baton over to Rebecca Cooper. Rebecca Cooper is going to present this research. She's our research director, and she previously worked as a senior project manager for the Gina Davis Institute on Gender and Media. She was also a research lead for Agenda for Children in New Orleans. Rebecca is a celebrated slam poet and a fat activist who runs marathons, lives in New Orleans with her dog Olive, her cat Pizza, and her partner Gina. So Becca, over to you.
Thank you very much. Okay, let's share this presentation. Did that work? It says it. Okay, yes, awesome. And thank you for telling everyone about my cat and dog named after food. I feel like that is an act of revolution for a fat person to have family members that are named after food. I'm so excited to tell y'all about our newest report that we just published today. And I think the link should be in the chat to the full report, but I'm just going to break down this study for you and give you the highlights. So the All Bodies report looks at the representations of fat women and girls in Hollywood. There is some research out there looking at media representations of fat women and girls, but not enough. And definitely not enough when it comes to representations of film. So we're really excited that this report is breaking a lot of barriers and bringing some attention in terms of data to stories that we've all known are existing, but now we have the data to back it. So this report is going to look at the films and television from the last decade. So we took the top 10 films from the last 10 years, actually 11 years, and the top 10 TV shows from that same time period and completed a content analysis of all of the characters in those shows in order to get some rich data on how fat characters are being portrayed. First, let's look at the quantity of representation. So how often are fat characters showing up? And first with film. There we go. So when we're talking about leads in the top films, this is a pretty stark data story here. There women and girls that are fat make up 42.5% of women, but only 0% of leads in the top films were fat women. So yeah, there's no other way to put this. It's just wild to see it. 0% compared to 42.5 of the percentage of the population. When we look at characters overall, we see some fat women characters, but not much. 6.7% of the women characters in the top films and top films were fat compared to 42.5%. We did some intersectional analysis as well in looking at who gets to show up fat when they do show up. And BIPOC women were underrepresented in film. BIPOC women make up 39.9% of women and only 29.8% of characters in the top films. When you break down BIPOC by race and ethnicity categories, you can see that actually Asian women and Black women are allowed to show up as fat in film, but we find large gaps in representation for Latin, MENA, Indigenous, and South Asian women. When it comes to sexuality, 7.1% of women identify as LGBTQ+, and again, we see 0% of fat women characters are allowed to show up as queer. Pretty wild to see that. Women over the ages, women 50 and older are actually pretty well represented in film. So women, 34.2% of women are 50 or older, and 37.9% of the characters that we looked at were fat women. When it comes to characters with disabilities, again, there were 0 fat women portrayed with disabilities in the top films. So a lot of room there in terms of increasing diversity within fat characters and also increasing the presence of fat characters to begin with. When we look at TV, we see very similar data stories here. Actually, non-fat women leads outnumber fat women leads 14-1 in the top TV. So we have 6.3% of leads were fat women compared to 42.5% of the population. Same story here when we look at characters overall in TV, only 6.6% of women characters were shown as fat. Again, when we look at BIPOC representation, actually for TV, we do see that BIPOC characters are well represented when it comes to fat. So we are seeing that BIPOC characters are allowed to be fat in TV. But when we break that down, again, we see a huge discrepancy here. We see that Black characters and South Asian characters are well represented compared to their population numbers. But we see absolutely no MENA and no Indigenous characters showing up, and very few Latin and Asian characters showing up, large gaps in representation. When it comes to queer characters in TV, 2.7% of fat women characters were shown as queer, which is better than film, but still far away from 7.1, which is that population figure. When it comes to characters over 50, characters ages 50 plus in top TV, we see that there are a few, there are some, but still a big gap compared to that 34.2% of the population. When it comes to characters with disabilities, fat women characters with disabilities, we only see 0.9% of fat women who are able to have a disability. And when we code for disabilities, we're looking for communication, cognitive, physical, and mental health disabilities. So that includes all of those. Only 0.9% of fat women characters were shown with a disability. Now to look at the quality of representation. So it's not enough to have fat characters showing up. We also want to make sure they're showing up in ways that aren't harmful and full of stereotypes that are rooted in fat phobia and fat hatred. So I combined the data stories here were remarkably similar for film and TV. So I'm going to show you all of them together. The first thing we found is that fat women are depicted as frumpy and unattractive across the board. In film, non-fat women are showing up as fashionable as attractive 56.1% of the time, compared to only 9.5% of fat characters. And there's almost twice as many non-fat characters are showing up as fashionable compared to fat characters in film. And we see those same trends with TV as well. Also, when we look at character traits, so a couple we pulled out for you, fat characters are almost twice as likely to be shown as stupid, and far more likely to be shown as funny, which plays into this larger trope of fat characters being laughable and the comic relief, or also shown as unintelligent and loserish, right? We have this idea of fat characters not being taken seriously or not being written with plot lines that can be taken seriously. So quite a big gap here. We also looked at relationships and sex too. So we found an interesting finding that mapped in both TV and film. The finding is that fat women characters are shown in relationships at higher rates than non-fat characters, but are not shown as sexual beings. So we looked at how many sex partners they're allowed to have and how many of them are shown engaging in sexual activity. And so while they are more likely to be in a relationship or committed relationship, they're not allowed to be sexual, which is a finding that is in line with decades of research and fatness studies that shows fat tropes and stereotypes around non-sexuality for fat characters. We also looked at sizes, tropes, and stereotypes in film and in TV. So first with film, this was quite a finding. a quarter of characters were fat women characters were shown with a sizist trope, and 30% of fat women characters were shown with a sizist stereotype. And there's a whole bunch of stereotypes and tropes we look for when it comes to fat representation, but the three most common were the comic relief trope, when a character is reduced to being the comic relief in scenes, the mama hen trope, and then also the sidekick trope, which is one, once you start noticing it, you can't stop noticing it, how fat characters are typically playing the sidekick to a thin lead. For TV, similar data story here. Almost 1 in 5 characters, fat women characters, are shown with a trope, and 1 in 5 fat characters are shown with a sizist stereotype. And the three most common in TV, again, comic relief and the mama hen, but also the nympho trope. So if you think about the Melissa McCarthy's character in Bridesmaids, who is sexually insatiable and making really overt, funny comments about sex to men, hitting on that man in the airplane, is a really good example of this character being reduced to that stereotype. We also looked at, and this is the last data story to show you, sizist slurs over the last 10 years. And 10.5% of films had a sizist slur, which was pretty surprising. 1 in 10 films have a sizist slur from the last 10 years. When you break that down by year, you can see that there's some progress in the last 4 years. Actually, the last 4 years, 3 of those years didn't have any sizist slurs, but 2020 hit kind of hard with that 22.2%. And though we see kind of fluctuation in terms of slurs over the years, we don't see steady progress. But anyways, the bottom line here is slurs were not as bad in TV, although we still don't see steady progress over the last decade, but only 2.6% of episodes had a sizist slur in them. And lastly, I just want to leave you with some of our action steps for content creators, and you can find all of this in the report too. But just to be really careful, to familiarize yourselves with fat stereotypes and tropes, and this goes for everybody, but especially for content creators, so that we're not adding to fat phobia in media.
I'm Sky Reed, as Caroline introduced me a little bit earlier. I'm excited to get to introduce our lovely panel. Becca's presentation was incredible, and before we actually dive in, I will say that we have the Q&A box, so please leave your questions in there. We see that they have been some added as well. We will get to them towards the end of the event. Now to introduce our lovely panelists. We're so grateful for them to have joined us today. To start, we have Alex LaRosa. Alex is a plus size model, digital content creator, brand consultant, self-acceptance advocate based in Los Angeles, California. The Cali native is committed to sharing her message of self-love and personal growth, and to look cute doing it. She has 2 major goals: to help women become the most powerful version of themselves, and to see women represented in the media. With over a decade of experience in the plus size modeling industry under her belt, Alex decided to launch her business as a content creator and brand consultant in 2017. Her work is driven by the belief that all people benefit from seeing bodies of every shape, size, and color made highly visible in fashion and in the media at large. Next up, we have Katie Winnan. Katie is passionate about speaking out against fat phobia and supporting others in feeling empowered in their bodies. On her podcast, Peach Please, Katie shares openly about fat phobia in society and provides a platform for folks to also share their stories and experiences living in larger bodies. Katie is working to bring size inclusivity to the corporate world by creating educational opportunities for her colleagues to learn about the realities of size bias, and to support her current workplace in making the company more safe and inclusive for all bodies. Katie is also a content creator on TikTok and Instagram, where she shares plus size fashion and lifestyle content. And then lastly, we have Marcy. Marcy is a full-time TV producer, plus size style expert, and co-owner of the Plus Bus, where she is located now, LA's premier destination for plus size fashion. Marcy has been featured on shows like Rachel Ray, The Dr. Oz Show, Hallmark, Home and Family, The Real, and Oprah.com. Marcy is passionate about helping people of all shapes and sizes dress well and be confident in the skin they're in. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We're so happy to be able to do this and to be speaking with you.
Thank you for having me, for having all of us.
So excited to be here. Thank you.
So to start, we have a question for all of you. What was your click moment, that moment when you had to start speaking out about fat phobia? And let's start with Alex, if you're ready.
Yeah, no problem. So for me, it wasn't as much of a click moment as much as it was a gradual shift over time. So I started my modeling career and my social media around the same time. And so I was sharing my experience becoming as a new, as a new model. I was sharing my experience, what it's like to get into the industry, what I was learning. And over time, I had women in my inbox and in my comments saying how important it was to see themselves represented, and that, like, the work that I was doing was really affecting them. And I personally didn't get into it, even considering the impact it could have past I love to be creative and shoot content and I wanted to be a model. Like, I didn't know what was going to come from this career, but I was really passionate about it. And it was really exciting to see the women that were reaching out to me and saying the impact that I was having. If I did have to pick one moment, I will say early in my career, I was modeling for this brand and they shot me in a dress, and it was a bodycon dress. They had two pictures of me in the same dress. One of them, I was like bold, I was fierce, I was like excited. It was like you could see my curves. It was like a fierce photo. And the other photo, I had like a shawl over it. It was very reserved and it was like very presentable. And it was like what we would expect from a fat person and how they were supposed to dress at the time. And they put the photos side by side and they put it out on the internet and they said, which photo do you like better? Now for them, it was just a customer base. Like, they were trying to see what their customers were interested in and what, you know, would sell better, right? They're trying to make sales goals at the end of the day. But it started a huge conversation and it ended up actually getting on the news, and it was a whole thing. And it was this huge conversation of, are fat women supposed to look presentable to and to whom, and like, or are fat women allowed to exist in their bodies loudly and take up space and be bold and be out there? And it was this conversation where people were like, it's just not flattering, or you're doing too much, you need to hide your body. And it was, I never heard that conversation on that scale. And I thought the conversation was so important. So many people were learning that fat bodies can exist without I don't know, without any limitations for the first time because of that conversation. And I was like, this needs to continue. So it was definitely a gradual thing. But if there was one moment that was like, I want to keep talking about this, it was that.
I think that's a great moment. I love how it ties in so much of what we're talking about here, the media, about how the way that we represent bodies and how we represent ourselves really, I mean, it's powerful. It's really powerful. And I'm so glad that you're able to share that moment with us. Marcy, do you have that click moment?
I think it's similar to Alex. I think every day it grows stronger in myself. And, I was sharing with the panel right before we started that the plus bus and my journey to the plus size world, I started as an on-camera host. I thought I was going to walk into a coaching session and be told, lose 100 pounds, you'll be a great, entertainment news reporter. And that was sort of like what I was looking for. I mean, from LA, thought that I was going to go be on the red carpets next to Ryan Seacrest, but I would have to be thin to do that. And really what happened, the world that opened up to me was that through this YouTube, which it's like wild to me that you can create a career from this little, computer device in your hand. Scorch magazine, and now defunct Plus Size magazine, reached out and said, we saw you're in LA, we love your content, we would love to have you help us with our plus size fashion magazine. So I came into this like very blind, not knowing anything about body positivity, and this was now 13 years ago. But I think every day my passion for it grows, and I don't have an aha moment, but I do feel the importance of what we're doing. And I always say it's like it starts on the outside and works your way in. With what we're doing here at the Plus Bus is clothes, but I think centrally it is, a human right to be able to have beautiful clothing, chairs that are comfortable at restaurants, and representation in media. So I mean, I'm like all over this. I love this so much. I love this conversation so much. I see some great questions, as well coming through, but it's still a daily, it's a journey. It's a practice. It's all of the above, but the activism portion of what I'm doing in this world, to me, grows every day, and pushing it into people's faces is like really important, right? And that becomes more important to me now as I have my Plus Bus social media and I have my personal social media, and now I'm like, it's kind of all the same. And so I think the importance of reminding thin people of the privilege they have in this world, and that there are other people, and that we have other concerns and rights and desires is like so valid and important. So I think it grows every day.
Thank you for that lovely answer. Katie, do you have your click moment?
Yeah, I think so similarly to what Alex and Marcy said, I really resonate with this idea of like that realization and those moments being progressive and kind of little things happening over time that really contribute to the realization that, oh, wow, this is a very real thing that exists. I do have a moment though, where I think a lot of puzzle pieces kind of fit into place. And for me, I attended a training through an organization called The Body Positive a couple years ago. They're a really incredible organization, and they've created a curriculum all about supporting others and building peaceful and healthy and loving relationships with their bodies. And so I attended the training to learn the curriculum and become a facilitator of it. And I think through learning the curriculum to share with others, I was doing a lot of like healing and applying it to myself as well. So there was a lot of like things happening in that sense. And one of the like moments that I had in that training was the realization that my body, being a plus size person, being a fat person, pretty much my whole life, I'd say from about the age of like, I don't know, like 8 or 9, 10, up until my adult life, my body has actually never been the problem. But my whole life, I've been made to feel like my body was the problem, from media, from family, from teachers, from doctors, from the whole world. I was getting these messages that my body was something to fix, and it was something that I should be able to fix and I should be able to control, and it's a problem to be solved. And it was kind of that aha moment of, oh wow, like I have internalized all of this as this is something that I need to change about myself. But the reality is, like, the real problem is what's happening outside of me. Like, this isn't something that I'm meant to fix on my own. And I think that understanding that has been really important because, you know, I know there's a lot of conversations out there around body image and self-esteem and self-love. And I think that any person in any body, any size, can have those feelings about themselves and can struggle with confidence and struggle with self-esteem. And I think it's really important to talk about and acknowledge how fat people experience massive biases and oppressions and hatred every single day. Like, the world is not built for fat people. I know we mentioned like being able to, thank you, Felicia, being able to like go to a restaurant and know that you're going to have a seat there that is comfortable or that fits you, or getting on a plane, or, you know, doing an activity that involves weight, or going shopping. There's like endless things that I think people in larger bodies have to experience that aren't necessarily made for them. And that's just one kind of facet of this example. But again, the world has a very real, I think, hatred and bias towards people in larger bodies. And that's not something that comes from within us or from within me. So all that to say is that realization that it wasn't me who needed to change, but this is a very real thing happening externally and happening in the world. That was a very big like click moment for me.
That I thank y'all so much for your powerful answers. I mean, yes, I'm just echoing everything that y'all are saying, and same with Alex was snapping. That's how I feel right now hearing all of you talk.
Yeah, and there was a question that came through that I think Marcy answered about when do we start shifting these messages, and Marcy responded birth. And it just had me thinking about what all of you were saying about how different it would be growing up fat if we had the three of you on social media to hear these messages from at an early age. Which brings me to my next question. So Alex, this is for you. You have made an incredible name for yourself in the world of modeling and fashion, and I've had the honor of watching it happen. And I know that from what you've shared, it's not been easy. And so I was hoping you could share with us about some of the challenges that you faced in the industry, and also the work that you've done to make it more inclusive.
Yeah, I would be happy to share about that. I've been modeling for 13 years. And so during that time, I have really got to witness a incredible and sometimes intense shift that's been happening within the plus size modeling world. When I first started, I feel like there was a little bit more room actually for plus size models to exist in their body as is. There weren't a lot of plus models, but if you were working and you had a job, it was your body and it was okay. A few years into my career, we really like the industry developed a new body standard that is committed to the plus size world. So like we know about body standards, right? We know that like it used to be Pamela Anderson and now it's like Kim Kardashian. Like, you know, like we know that the world at large and the culture has like a desired body type. Within the modeling industry, within straight size modeling, it's always size 0, you know, as thin as possible. You're a fancy hanger, right? That's what the models are expected to be. At the beginning of plus size modeling, when I was starting, there are people who obviously came before me, but like when I was starting, we were allowed to exist in our bodies as they were. And then I would say maybe 2014, 2015 is when we saw a new plus size body standard develop that requires plus size models to be the right curves, a size 12 or 14, the right height. Like it was way more regulated which girls were working and which girls were getting signed to agencies. And, you know, that's the whole cycle. So I never really fit into like that standard. I have more of like a pear shape. If we're going to compare our bodies to fruit, I don't know why that's a thing. But if we're going to do it, I'm a pear. And it's always been an issue. I've always had agents, I've had clients who told me that I need to lose weight in certain places, that I need to change my body. You see models who are actually significantly smaller padding up so that they can have their Kim Kardashian curves, or they can have, you know, obviously shapewear is a thing. I think one of the biggest challenges we face as a model is fitting into this very, very slim idea of what is the perfect model size. And that is because of sample sizes. So when brands actually are purchasing or developing clothes, they get sent samples, and that's what models wear, not the products that the customer ultimately buy. We're wearing samples. And usually they're in the smallest size available. And so we need the models to fit the smaller size. One of the biggest things I've done is worked with brands as a consultant to educate them as to why it is important to purchase samples in sizes bigger than just the smallest size, so that you can have models that are diverse in size, so that your customers can see themselves actually represented on their website and can know what the clothes are going to look like on their bodies. It actually helps the customer have a more exciting shopping experience. So
Yeah.
that,
Sorry.
no, it's okay. Like,
I was gonna say that we just got a comment talking about that, how, you know, if you look at online stores and you see only a very thin model wearing it, you may not be incentivized to actually spend money because you don't know how it's going to look on you. You have no concept of how it's going to fit. So it makes sense. It's profitable.
Jump in because we do live streaming almost every day in a basically like a QVC style modeling. Like I hate being like modeling, but we are modeling the clothes.
you are.
Everyone from customers to some of the people that work here, to some of their moms, you know, different people will come and sort of like guest star on these shows. And as someone who has been, you know, interested in being a part of the TV industry and media for my entire life and has worked off camera and on camera, I find it so fascinating. We look at DMs. If we are like 1 minute late to live stream, is your show on today? What time is the show? Because I have people tell me that they're not even watching to shop. Tears, but they just want to watch to see bodies that look like theirs on a screen doing whatever. And you will joke and we'll give little like body positive messaging and things, but it's the power of seeing someone that actually looks like you on screen, whether it's to sell a garment or whether it's to sell soap, or like Dove has done, right? Or just on a show. I mean, it's really incredible. And we all carry our weight so differently, you know, like some of us have a bigger tummy and we talk about that, like this dress fits me really great down here and it's stretchy. And we have so many people that will say, oh, can so-and-so try that on for me, because they know our body types and they know that if it fits Emily, it will fit them. If it fits Jen or Marcy. And I think that's what has set us apart. But I think the power in seeing yourself represented is just incredible. And I mean, I have a million stories. I remember the first time I walked into Justice, a children's store, and saw like a little plus size model on the wall, and I like wanted to cry. And I was at Torrid yesterday, and one of the models is so thin. I'm like, I actually like wanted to talk to the manager, and I'm like, she didn't put the poster. It's not her fault. But you know, like it's just wild.
Seeing plus size kid models has, like, it made me cry the first time I see it. I completely like relate to that, because I remember, shopping with my friends when I was younger, and, I'm sitting there looking at bracelets and scarves because I can't fit in any of the clothes. And all the cool clothes, of course, like don't come in your size. And so like to see these cool brands with the models, I was just like, this is like the inner healing that I needed for like my inner child. Like it was healing to see that. And I know I am so happy knowing that like when I have kids, they will have that representation now.
That's really beautiful. I think that's the power of media. That's the power of seeing ourselves represented, is having that healing and of knowing that the next generation is going to be better off.
Mhm.
Hopefully they're going to be better off. So Katie, can you tell us a little bit more about your work to fight fat phobia? What is your approach to shifting the culture when it comes to fat hatred and fat phobia?
Yeah. I am a huge fan of sharing stories. I think that is like, I connect so deeply with hearing other people's stories and experiences. And it just feels like a great and powerful way for me to be able to share, here's something I've learned, or here's something I've experienced. And I find that it's able to bring community together, and I think let others know that they're very much not alone in situations. So I feel like sharing stories and storytelling is kind of a common thread that weaves through anything and everything that I've done. And I think that also goes back to being like thinking of little Katie, in middle school and high school, even in college. Like my circle and my group of friends, there was really no other fat folks there. And if there was, we bonded over this like self-hatred. Like we hate ourselves. What diet can we do next? Like what weight loss thing can we do? And that was kind of what brought us together. But there was really no, I guess, like influence or example of what it looks like to have a loving relationship with your body or with food, or even just like a neutral one, like a peaceful, neutral one. So all I have to say is that I think that it made me feel even more so like sharing an experience and sharing a story is important because I know what that feels like to feel really alone. I think a lot of us probably do, actually. So sharing stories is so important. And so I think, through the first time that I didn't even really, this was probably pre-knowing like the term fat phobia and really what that meant and what that looked like. But I remember just wanting to start like a community of people who could come together, who were plus size, who weren't plus size, and be able to talk about like our experiences with our relationship with our bodies, with health, with wellness in a completely weight neutral way. And I think that was kind of my first like segue into wanting to talk about these things and wanting to address these conversations and experiences that were happening with our bodies. I started my podcast a couple years ago, and like that is entirely about storytelling and bringing in folks from the fat community to share their stories. And I feel like what's so wild is that in every, I think, guest that I've had on, there's so much difference and there's so much similarity. And there's so many times where I know I'm listening and we're having a conversation. I'm like, yeah, that's happened to me before. Like we just mentioned Justice. It's like, I can think of so many stores and so many brands that I couldn't wear as a kid because they didn't have my size. And because, like I couldn't go shopping with my friends to be able to like have that experience with them anyway. So, and then I think that we mentioned this earlier or in my intro that you read, Sky, but I feel really, really lucky, and I have to shout out my my work, my 9-to-5 job. And there's a bunch of people from my 9-to-5 on this call, which is like the coolest thing. But I feel really lucky that they've given me a space to also talk about these things. And I think that feels really, really important, because I knew that before I'd even started at the company I'm at now, I knew how much DEI was so important to me and was such an important part of the culture that I wanted to be a part of. And I also recognize that size inclusivity and size representation and weight bias was not something that was being included in these conversations, especially in the way that it intersects with things like race and gender and sexuality and ability. And so coming into the company that I'm in now, I was very like forward, I guess, about my podcast and about the things that I was interested in, especially when it comes to size representation, and feel very lucky that I was given space to like share resources about fat phobia and to talk about it and to bring it into our DEI conversations. Excuse me. So I feel like those have been really supportive outlets through the podcast, through, again, being able to like support like culture shifts that and conversations that we're having in a corporate environment and whatnot. But I think going back to my original point of storytelling, I feel like that sharing stories, sharing experiences is what I find to be very powerful for connecting people.
Thank you for sharing that, Katie. It's interesting, even with this campaign, this All Bodies campaign, that we have to start by saying fatness is a social justice issue. Fat phobia and fat hatred are social justice issues. Caroline started this Zoom off with that, and yeah, it's wild that so many people doing DEI initiatives are not even willing to consider size discrimination. So thank you for bringing that up. Marcy, my next question is for you, although I think you've answered it already. So I'm going to shift it a little to include an audience question. So I'm interested in your efforts to shift the culture around fat phobia. And we've heard a little bit about your journey to opening the Plus Bus and who you are. So I'm hoping you can answer that. And also this question here, how do you do that? How do you shift the culture and uplift fatness while operating within society's norms of so-called flattering that often idolize thinness? Like, how do you work through and navigate that issue in the fatness world?
Well, to say anyone is shifting culture, I mean, I think that's like Beyonce level, so I hope I can shift like one person a day. And if I can do that, then I feel like I'm doing good, right? I think yesterday we were streaming, and we've been streaming to TikTok, and it's a much different audience. It's either like roses, 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 or it's like oink, 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 oink. So it's very touch and go. Yesterday, there was a person that said immediately, just like logs on, "You're too shiny." And I kind of was like, "Oh yeah, I have too much bronzer on today, blah, blah, blah." And then she's like, "That outfit's unflattering on you." And I don't know what it was. It was like the sugar-free Red Bull. It was just, I woke up on the wrong side of the bed, but I immediately like went and saw who it was. And I was just like, nope, fat white ladies that are mean don't get to stay here. You don't get the Plus Bus. You don't get these clothes. You don't get my good vibes. And it really kind of caught me off guard, because I don't typically, I almost like the day the person kept oinking, I actually like the challenge of trying to work through the distraction. Like my ADD-ness is like, I'm gonna keep going and you will not distract me. And I wish, and I was talking through it with my mom last night on the drive home, and I wish in that moment I had said, "You know what? It's okay that you don't think this is flattering, because flattering and the idea of what is flattering is dead. If it is flattering to me, to my eye, to my soul, to my body, it feels good, it's flattering." And that word, whether it's flattering for others, for the consumption of others, flattering for the male gaze, which I think is often what women have been asked to do, is sort of dying. It's definitely dead here at the Plus Bus. We are very much about wearing what you want when you want. And I think that shifting culture comes when you wear the crop top, when you wear the bikini, and when you just kind of like don't give a F about what others think, because it does not matter. Those people are not paying your bills. Those people are not living your life. Like, I have a great life. And one of the things in my life that is a part of me is that I am fat, but nothing is like this idea. And someone was mentioning like in the questions, I really like this question, is like, why is fat phobia so socially acceptable? Like, what is the root? What is the origin? What is the Adam and Eve of fatness as a bad thing? I have an art piece. It's hideous in my bathroom. It's part of like the cement in the wall, but it is these like beautiful, like Botticelli like figures, and they're fat and they have big tummies. And I'm like, when something shifted, something changed, because this used to be really beautiful. That looks just like my stomach. So I think for me, it's every day. It's waking up at this body. It's kicking ass. It's wearing what I want. And it's usually telling someone, and I've gotten a lot bolder when someone says something in front of me. I was at a lunch with like a distant cousin, very thin. And she said something like, "Gosh, before I got pregnant, I thought I was so fat. And look at me now, I'm really fat." And I remember looking over at her and being like, "And look at me, I'm actually fat. And look at how beautiful I am." I thought my mother was going to pass out, like of just being mortified of how forward I was. But that's just, now I just say it. I don't even care. And I hope that that moment will stay with that person, and hopefully will change them, or that they'll, the people that follow me on my personal page or on my Facebook that are friends from high school will see these things. And like you said, if I'm shifting culture. Hopefully I'm shifting like one person's thought, but I think it starts with us of deciding that we get to do what we want, eat what we want, wear what we want, love who we want, how we want. And that's where the shift begins.
Thank you so much for answering that question. I think it really does it does start with us, and hopefully this entire event will also help shift culture a little bit. That will have a couple people be changed, or hopefully all of y'all will be changed. Hopefully all of y'all are already aware of all these issues, but we'll see. But that is, I think, a great transition into our next question, which an audience member also asked. But this is about allyship and how we can, we were wondering if you all could speak to overcoming these different stereotypes and giving allies tips. And this audience member shared that as an ally, they're going to share this recording with their network. And I think that's a great first step. And so that's a question for all of you about allyship.
I can go. I feel like, so one thing I feel like Marcy just said is like, take up space, right? Like Fatphobia wants us to be smaller. Fatphobia wants us to be smaller psychologically and physically. I feel like taking up space and allowing yourself to be your full self, however you want to express it, without using someone else's without considering someone else's thoughts about you, that is how you like fight fat phobia, right? So for allies, I think it's giving space to plus size women when that space is being taken away. So like if you are a thin person and you have a platform, I think that you should help amplify fat voices and messaging about fat phobia, or I guess anti-fat phobia work. And I feel like as an ally, you should continue to self-educate, continue to diversify what you're taking in. I think one thing that, with Becca's report, I think, if we're not actively doing something, what is just given to us in terms of media and culture is fat phobia. So if you're not actively learning about, fat phobia, or learning about body positivity, body acceptance, about body neutrality, whatever kind of way you go, I think if you're not actively putting that into your, the things that you take in on a regular basis, you're going to only be consuming unhealthy fat phobic things, because that's what the world has to offer right now. And that goes with your timelines, that goes with everything you watch, it's your family, your friends. I think that as an ally, what you should do is give space to fat voices and to anti-fat phobic rhetoric. I think that means when someone says something that's maybe a stereotype or a microaggression towards a fat person, you say something. You say that's unacceptable. Or do you feel fat or do you feel ugly? Why do you equate the two? Do you feel fat or are you just bloated? I think that's like a conversation that you can have with your friends, with your parents, with whoever all the time. And so I think for allies, it's continuing to educate yourself. It's speaking up, especially when it's people you're close to, because they'll hear it from you more likely than anyone else. And I think it's making sure that everything that you're taking in is diverse and is well representative of like different types of fat people too. Yeah.
A huge +1 to everything Alex said. And to build on top of that, I think that something actually Becca and the Rep Project have taught me a lot about is media literacy. And I think that ties into what you were saying, Alex, about being able to understand like the things that I'm seeing. So I don't know if there's any fellow like Bravo fans out there, or like reality TV fans. I love all of that. And I'm constantly consuming that type of content. And I think that it's become really important to me that as I continue to consume that content, to know what I'm seeing and what I'm watching, and to build that media literacy, to know that when I see a fat person who is being depicted as somebody who is always eating junk food, or who is lazy, or who is not very smart, the list goes on and on, as like Becca outlined in her report, to know what that is and to be able to call it out and to recognize it. So I think that understanding, like building that media literacy, I think in all ways beyond fatness as well, I think is so important. And I think in addition, when it comes to allyship, I think that listening is really important as well. I think that sometimes, like, I don't know if anyone else relates to this, but I felt reluctant to share experiences because of that feeling of like, I'm not going to be like, people are going to look at that and be like, oh, that's not real. Like, that didn't really happen to you, or like, that's not a thing, And something I'm thinking about is in the first season of Shrill, she went to a coffee shop and a thin woman called her out and was basically like, I can help bring out the inner thin person inside of you, which is like not a thing, by the way. And Becca and I had a conversation about like, that's a real thing. You know, I know a lot of people watch that and thought, oh, people don't just, you know, approach fat people on the street and say like, oh, I can help you lose weight and like bring out this inner thin person inside of you and like make your life better. It's a real thing. It's a very real thing that happens. Or, but yeah, so I think listening to our stories, listening to our experiences, I think a step beyond that, something that I like that goes above and beyond for, well, not even above and beyond, but it's meaningful for me is just being thoughtful in terms of the like experiences that you do with your fat friends. Like if you're going shopping together, are you going shopping somewhere where they can like they have inclusive options that your friend can try on as well? Or are they going to be stuck just looking at jewelry and purses? Or if you're going to a restaurant, like, again, what's the seating situation, you know, or if you're going to do an activity together, like, is there a weight limit? Is this going to be potentially an issue for like the folks around you who are in larger bodies? But I think, but yeah, I'm going to stop there.
No, I just want to echo, that's like the simplest things to start is like chair. You can be an ally by just acknowledging, like I went to a theater the other day with a friend and as soon as she sat down and she's like tall and thin, but she's tall and like, she's thin, but you know, she's like a 10, whatever. She's like, she sat down before I did and she literally was like, holy, these chairs are from another time. And immediately it just felt like thank you for acknowledging that because I'm about to try to wiggle my way into this thing. And I think like what you just said, Katie, it's like when you do go somewhere, like take note of like those metal chairs that are very like common now. They're the devil. They're from Satan's crotch.
They literally get bruises from those chairs.
Terrible. Yeah.
Small thing you can do is like, for example, offer the booth side, or in general, just pay attention when you go somewhere to what the seating is and note the next time I invite Marcy to lunch, I'm gonna invite her here. And I have the privilege of speaking from sort of like the middle of the spectrum of being plus. And I know that if I'm having pain in some of those, you know, chairs, and I think Tigress, who I love and respect so much, and I just love that you're here. Thank you for being here, Tigress. You should be on this panel, but more panels to come. That is like such a simple and really, I think, easy thing. Chairs.
Thank you. Yes. And it's like to go back to what Katie was talking about with DEI, I think that's one way that offices and corporate places can really make it. And also we were talking about before this panel, our university, Alex and I both graduated from Occidental College, is now including body size questions in a battery around student experiences. It's important for one of those things is, do the desks fit? Do the chairs fit? Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Really quickly, and I'm going to try to make this as quick as possible. We've got a few questions about the research, so I'm just going to answer them real fast and then pose another question to our panel. The first question, and I apologize for freezing earlier, but I think I got through everything. Just we measure the top shows based on audience viewership, and the metric we use is most watched, most popular. So those shows and films we got from the Nielsen's list of top watched over the past 10 years. Another question that came up is the difference between a stereotype and a trope. So a stereotype is when in a moment a character is being reduced to a quality or a trait based on their identity, and that reduction itself based on that identity is inherently dehumanizing, right? So that's why we are coding for stereotypes in media content. A trope is when that character is completely reduced to that stereotype. So a stereotype can happen in a moment or a beat or a scene, and a trope is a character is absolutely portrayed and reduced to that stereotype. Another question that was asked is, are we looking at how fat women are? So how, like the actual size diversity within fat characters? And yes, and I would love to do another study on that. The real sad answer for you is that there's just not enough fat characters to do a whole lot of intersectional analysis. And so we need more numbers before we can run some meaningful data stories with that. And then lastly, this is a tricky question that I'm happy you asked so we can talk about a little bit, but a question about how we operationalize fashionable and attractive, right? So we have a 5-point scale that we use for both of those questions that are based on previous literature. And that in order to make it easy to code and measure something that is very hard to code and measure, we end up using this 5-point scale. And we code from the hegemonic standard, right? We are thinking as though we're the average audience member watching this TV content. And that includes many, many hours of training as a team to make sure that we have intercoder reliability, which means we're all coding the same way when we see this content. And weirdly, even though it's so icky to talk about coding characters as fashionable, and mostly it's icky to talk about characters as being attractive, we have high rates of reliability for those measures. So it's I think because it's so obvious the racist and sexist and sizist ideals of body image and beauty, we all end up being on the same page. But yes, tricky, and I would love to talk more about the intricacies of measuring for representation, but I'm going to move it back to our panelists. So this question is for everybody, and I'm really, really curious. I know some people have been putting in the chat some of their recommendations, but the question is, who's getting it right? Who's leading the way in a way to shift? Oh, and this is an audience question, by the way. Who's leading the way to shift in perception in TV and film? What are y'all watching? What is doing it right? What is good? And besides the three of you, who should we be following? And I'll start with you, Marcy.
TikTok. Winning the game, because you can exactly find yourself, the people that reflect you, and authentic humans that are just being funny and telling stories like Katie said. I mean, congratulations on that, following Katie. It only comes from authenticity, and the more authentic you are, I think the more that people want to be a part of that. So for me, if I have an hour, I will watch TikTok, and that's where I find my joy, and has brought me so much joy through the pandemic. An hour a day keeps the blues away, in my opinion. And I also, do consume some, a lot of scripted, but some reality. Katie, my dream is to be the first fat housewife. So just fingers crossed on that. First I would need the house, but no, I'm just kidding. They all live in Encino now. It's like not even, but all that to say, TikTok. And for me, it's like, I want to just make my own content. Like just now I was thinking about like, how can I come up with like a little series where it's like a fat friend and a skinny friend shopping, and like each week, just like a little skit of like all the things that we go through in our experiences. But to be honest, I think TikTok would be my answer. I don't feel any like Sweet Magnolias isn't doing it for me.
Agreed. I completely agree. I think that, I mean, I called myself out with the reality TV, so y'all know like a good amount of what I'm watching, but agreed, like TikTok has been a beautiful place for me. I know we talk a lot about how much of a time suck it can be, and I've gotten a lot out of it. I've found community. I've learned so much. I found connection, going back to storytelling, like whether it's, sharing mine, sharing others. I think what's really beautiful is getting to see all kinds of bodies in this very like expressive, creative way. That's the best. Like, I think that's one of my favorite comments ever, is when somebody says, your body's just like mine. And like seeing, what you're wearing or seeing your body is like been so helpful for me. Like, that's just the coolest thing. So I agree. I think a lot of my time, when I have time to dedicate to consuming content, it's usually on TikTok, because I feel somewhat in control and empowered in terms of what I'm seeing based on who I'm choosing to follow and who I'm engaging with. And I feel like then my For You page reflects that based on, engaging with other fat content creators. So +1 to Marcy. I'm definitely on TikTok a good amount.
+2 to Marcy. I am also on TikTok. Clearly that's just a winner. I feel like what you said, Katie, of you being able to curate your own feed and really make sure that you're seeing a wide variety of people that represent your own interests is like, it's, that you can go on there and not necessarily be bombarded with like a fatphobic something, right? Like, it's just the space where you get to see a diverse set of fat women living their lives. Like, I have this woman that I follow. I don't know her handle by heart. I can like kind of visualize it. And she's like a fat farmer, and I'm obsessed with her because she's just so cool. And I'm like learning about farming, and I'm into it. And she's just like, it's fun because it's like, I am interested in gardening and growing my own food. And it's like, I get to see this woman that looks like me in this thing that I'm interested in. And it has nothing to do necessarily about like, and we're going to talk about fatphobia today. It's just like the representation is there. And I think that's really cool. And TikTok has that for literally anything that you could want. And I think besides that, and I literally just rewatch the same show over and over again. Like, I watch New Girl, Schitt's Creek, like that's my life. But I watched Lizzos Big Girls, and I cried most episodes just because the representation and the opportunities.
Didn't you get a delivery from Lizzo's Big Girls, Alex?
Oh my gosh, I did. It was so cool. I'm like, I nerded out. Yeah, they pulled up with music and a truck and a huge flower display that was like ginormous, and girls that were dancing.
I'm really glad you mentioned that show. I was able to go to her For Your Consideration event, and she was there, and it was just like her and Lonnie Love talking about the show. And I would say if you can watch that show and you can tell other people to watch it, it is a really important show for fat representation, whether you like reality or whether you like competition shows.
Yeah.
Doing the most for plus size people, and has probably been the first show on any sort of streaming platform with this much positivity around being a big person and being on a screen and on a platform like this. And her whole thing was kind of like, I needed fat dancers, and I have asked every agency for fat dancers, and
they don't have them.
But why'd you do the show? Why'd you do the show? She's like, I literally just needed fat dancers, and like Amazon gave me money to film this, and so we filmed it. But I also wish that we could talk about TV all day and all night, because I think we need to do better about just not loving Shrill, because it's 80 Bryant, and Shrill could have been better. It could be better. There will be more Shrills, but
I never watched it. I felt like a bad fat person. Like, I never watched Shrill. I should have supported.
Canceled, Alex, because they needed Hulu. You didn't give them enough money. But anyways, a lot to be said, and I think we should demand more. Love seeing all the sidekicks that are new. There's like a new beautiful Black woman that's been a sidekick in a couple things lately, but definitely want to like push to see, again, like, we are the leads. I am the main character of my life, as all of you are yours. And so let's make some more amazing TV and film, because main character energy.
Thank you so much for your recommendations. I think seeing Becca's presentation at the beginning and knowing that there are really just so few shows that even have fat representation at all, or any positive representation. I think the fact that TikTok is really pushing us forward. Hopefully we'll see more. Hopefully we'll see more things like Big Girls. We also got a recommendation in the chat from a viewer who recommended Astrid and Lily Save the World, which is a sci-fi channel show with two teen main characters who are fat, dating, and going through teen issues, and they're also saving the world together. So I've not personally watched, I watched the first episode. I haven't watched the whole thing, so I can't give my personal comments on it, but Randy recommends it.
I will be watching.
So thank you. Now we're going to be closing out. Thank you to everybody for attending this event today. Thank you to our panelists for joining us and for sharing their insights on this topic. I mean, Becca was co-hosting, but also thank you to Becca for giving a presentation and for doing this incredible research. We're looking forward to hosting you all at future events, and you will be getting an email from us with a link to this recording, with a link to the research, with more information about where you can keep up with our incredible panelists today. And thank you. Thank you so much, everybody. We hope to see you soon at future events.
Thank you to all of you. Take care, everyone.